Hey everyone, you're listening to the TEN7 Podcast, where we get together every fortnight, and sometimes more often, to talk about technology, business, and the humans in it. I'm your host, Ivan Stegic. My guest today, on a very special episode of the podcast, is DJ LexFunk. His real name is Alexis Vasquez, but we just call him Lex at the office. He's one of the senior members of the team, a Drupal developer that's been with TEN7 since the days of Adobe Flash and ActionScript. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, Lex, to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. Adobe, that's funny.
It is. That is funny. I remember you sitting in my office with your DVD of the portfolio of work you had, and amongst it was certainly some Flash.
Yes, that's true. We're trying to bring it back, but nobody wants it.
Nobody seems to want it anymore. I don't know. So you are solely responsible for the music that plays at the beginning of every TEN7 podcast. It's played now 74 times in the past. It's a signature of the TEN7 podcast. We've basically had it since the first episode back in April of 2017. If you remember, back then we actually called it an audio cast. It wasn't a podcast.
I remember.
And yeah. I don't know why we did that.
Because we weren't all the way in. We were like, do we want to do a podcast? Or
I think you're right. We weren't all the way in. It was 5 minutes, right? And then it's not a podcast.
Right. Yep. We didn't know what it was.
We didn't know what it was. And then back then, we had also just started being completely distributed and officeless. So after being, a brick and mortar shop for 10 years. So much has changed since we first started. And so this episode feels like it's the right time to change the music of the show as well. What do you think?
I was kind of excited to hear that you wanted a remix, and I had a few ideas. But if we go back to, I think, the original track, I think, so you said April was the first release of the
April,
podcast,
April
audiocast.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the original recording was actually done in November of 2016.
It was?
Yeah, it was. It was something I had worked on during my sabbatical and just had. And when you mentioned that you would want some music, I immediately thought of that track. Oddly enough, the track name I saved it as the whole project name. This is months before this was ever an idea. The file name is That's What She Said. For no reason. I don't know why. Maybe I had episodes of The Office in the background or something. I have no idea what it was. But then I was like, well, that's like a perfect name. I'm like, he might like this one. So I think I played it at an in-person for you. And
you did. I think we were at... were we at the library, the Walker Library over in Uptown? Maybe you played it there?
I think so, yeah. I think that's exactly where I played it.
Yeah, I liked the hook right away. What was your original inspiration for that track? You said you made it during your sabbatical, so you were kind of taking time off. I'm sure you were playing a lot of music. What was the original inspiration?
Right. So yeah, back during the sabbatical, I was kind of treating every day as a work day to work on music. So I was getting up like 7 a.m., making coffee, going down to the basement studio and just working on music every morning. And then at night too. So then, in the afternoons I would spend time doing whatever else. But I was experimenting a lot with different sorts of synthesizer sounds and different sort of plugins. I was just sort of catching up on what was new in Ableton Live then, and getting to know my equipment a lot better. But really, I was doing watching a lot of YouTube tutorials on Ableton Live, learning different mixing techniques and how to automate sounds, which kind of just sort of led to me. This was sort of an experimental track that kind of evolved, I guess.
And do you have that track, that original track, handy that you might be able to play?
Yeah. Yep. Here, let me push.
Let's hear it. Let's hear what it sounded like.
All right. Here it is.
So that's I've heard the remixed version of this so many times now, and I've listened to it so many times now that I feel like this track that you just played, which is played for 74 episodes, it's too fast.
It's too fast.
It's too fast.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I mean, it seems too fast now. Yes, it's weird.
It's weird. So let's talk about the speed. So that's a major component when you're composing music, is to decide, okay, how fast is this thing going to be?
Right. So, I mean, one of the techniques I was working on trying to get down was it's sort of a ducking sidechain effect on.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so I'll explain a little bit. So the synthesized sound. Here, I'll play it for you. This one. You hear how it kind of rises up?
Yeah.
And so what's happening there is when it's quiet, that's when the kick drum is hitting. So here it is without the ducking. So it's a lot louder. So when we match that up with the kick drum, or the drum beat, which is here, it sounds like this. So each one of those bass hits will actually play louder than the synthesizer, and the synthesizer will be turned down, which creates this sort of pulsing effect, audio effect. And so that was the one thing that I was trying to just learn how to work with that and try to make my mixes less muddy. And I don't know, I think we achieved it a little bit. So you can kind of hear that in the track. And then if we go back to the recording, you can kind of hear it doing that, right? So,
oh, yeah.
And then when it gets to the part where the drums cut off, you can hear that synthesizer play out a lot longer.
Yeah, it's like it's being amplified on a regular basis.
Right. And so that's some automation that is built into Ableton Live that I configured, that we can you can tell different channels to duck out when one's at a certain volume, and that's kind of what I did there. So it's called sidechaining. And I've watched too many videos on it, and that's what I spend my time doing.
It's amazing. So there's a vast number of layers in the audio, and when you hear the final sound, I don't think you appreciate the number of channels and the number of layers that go into putting all of those things together.
Right, and that's kind of the idea behind the technique too, is you play certain sounds at a certain time. If you play them all together very loud, it's kind of muddy sounding, and you can't differentiate what you should be focusing on.
When you first started screwing around with this track back at the end of 2016, was there a particular sample or a particular sound that you heard that you started with? Because I refer to it as the hook, but that's kind of the part of the song or the part of the track that I kind of think about as being the defining melody or the defining thing that the podcast intro music is. And I guess I wonder if you think it's the same thing or if it started somewhere else.
It started somewhere else, definitely. So it started with the drums, just that basic drum loop I had, and I just kept that basic drum loop. I didn't do anything else with it. And then I added just a simple bass line over it.
Yeah, that one.
Just a basic bass line. But I think actually the bass probably came after the synthesizer part that I've already played. And so I had the drum beat and the bass drum, or in the bass line and the synthesizer going. And then I wanted to add one more element, and I wanted it to sound like a rhythm guitar, sort of. I mean, it was still synthesized. But it ended up sounding like this. And that just followed the same.
That's what I refer to as the hook. That melody that you have.
Yeah, and so like that was probably the last part I added that I thought it was something that it needed. It was kind of brought it in for what would be the hook. I don't like. It was just a result of trial and error, trying different rhythms. And not playing so many. I mean, there's a lot of notes, but it's the same note over and over again for the most part.
Mm-hmm. So it reminds me of the software development process a little bit, doesn't it? Like it's iterative.
Yes, it's iterative. Yes, it's like a lot of trial and error and even progressive, I guess. Yeah.
Do you have an endpoint you're trying to get to? Like, do you know where you're going?
Well, for this particular project, no. I mean, as far as I got is what we ended up using on the podcast. So I didn't come back to the project after that until we wanted to maybe master a few things and switch some levels and come up with a better set of sequences for us. But other than that, it's all the same 4 elements really, just the drums, the bass, and a synthesizer sound that is layered itself, and then like the guitar sound.
Does it change after you've left the music alone for a month or two?
Sometimes. I often just come back to old stuff and think like, oh, maybe I need to let's listen to that again. Like maybe I'll have an idea of what it could be, and then I usually think like, well, this is pretty well done, I would suppose, and it just needs to be sequenced in a way that's maybe more of a song arrangement, but for the most part, I usually end up coming back to tracks and just finishing the sequences and not adding too much more and just adjusting levels and mastering it more like that, rather than adding more elements to it.
Is there a maximum number of elements that you consider, like if you go over this threshold in the number of elements, like that's too many?
No, I don't start any projects with any rules, really. It's just kind of start with a clean slate, usually maybe a simple drum beat, depending on the idea. That's one workflow, is you lay down just a simple drum beat and kind of start messing around with the keyboard a little bit, figure out a chord progression, or figure out a bass line you like, or figure out some sounds you want to use, maybe some samples, and then just sort of start trying different things out.
I think it turned out really well, and it's definitely been something I've enjoyed listening to at the beginning of every podcast. And now that we have a new remix, what was your initial reaction when I said, hey, what do you think about remixing? Were you inspired by like something different? Like what were you thinking when I asked you about that?
I was intrigued by it. I definitely wanted to do a remix. Immediately when you mentioned it, I did want to go, I wanted to change it up a little bit and make it like, give it more of like a Latin vibe, like at least the drums. And I didn't know I was going to slow it down so much, but that is kind of what I was thinking. But then I think you let me know, maybe, I don't even know when the original text you sent me was, probably in like August of this year, of 2019.
Yeah, it was at the end of the summer, a couple months ago now.
And so, and you're like, maybe in, what, I think you gave me like, maybe in a few weeks, you don't need to do it now, but in a few weeks do it. I think I waited like like 2 months before I even touched it. But I was thinking about it and I had ideas. You also had ideas, right? Like this Morse code thing that you passed to me.
Yeah, and I didn't, like, when I suggested it to you at first, I was just like, we could use some freshening up, something different, some change. I'm going to ask Lex what he thinks, and he can work on it if he wants to. And then it was about, I think, a month and a half later, I was surfing the web and reading articles, and discovered a website where you could give the website text, and it would give you the Morse code beep, dots and dashes of that text you gave it. And I thought, what would be the first thing I would put in a text box on a site like that? Well, not my name. So I put in TEN7, and I thought, that sounds kind of cool. I'm going to share this with Lex. Maybe he can use it somehow.
Right. And I liked the idea of it. And so I actually took that original audio that you sent me, and I was able to download the file from the site. I actually recorded it into Ableton. And then I was able to figure out what the dots and dashes were in a MIDI form.
Nice.
So that I could change the pitch of it and change the sound. And
you made it echo too, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. So, like, I don't think technically it's a Morse code sound anymore because it's a lot more dots and dashes. I don't know. Can you do reverb in Morse code? I don't think so.
I think Morse code is not even 8-bit. It's
right.
It's 1 bit. Or 2 bits. Why don't we play the original and then play the remix, and then let's talk about the process of what happened in the remix and how we changed it, or how you changed it.
All right. You want to play the original, full original?
Yeah, let's play the first 30 seconds or so the people are used to.
All right. Here that goes. Okay, and now the remix. The remix. All right, here we go.
Here it is. Man, there's a lot going on there, and I think you can feel the essence of the original, and you can still, see that it's different. Definitely Latin flavor remix, absolutely. Like, that was the first thing you said that came to mind. Definitely, there's that. So, also slower, and so let's talk about the beats per minute. Like, 125 for the first one, right?
Right.
We slowed it down.
Yeah.
What did we?
We ended up at 107, which just felt right.
Of course it did.
I mean, it does. Like, I started with just the drum beat, right? First I actually started with the Morse code thing, and I was like, all right, well, let's see what that sounds like over drums. And maybe should I play that part? Or you want to hear that?
Sure, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So, like, it starts off at 125, and then it'll slowly slow down to 107, and it just sort of kind of clicks into the right speed. Here, you listen. So like we get down to 107 and it just sort of feels right. I don't know. It was like the right speed I wanted. It felt like I wanted the track to be more laid back and not so in your face. So when this started off at 125 BPM, it seemed like it was too much. Like there would have been a lot going on. And I just did not, I don't know. I don't know when other people listen to podcasts. I mostly listen to them in the mornings and while I'm doing a little bit of work. I don't need the theme song to just be right in my face, high energy to start. Mm-hmm. I wanted something a little more laid back.
And I love that you landed on 107. Like,
well, yeah. I mean, so like I think I worked with 110 for quite some time, and then I was like, what's 3 BPM? Make it 107. We'll see how that goes. And I actually liked it better. And yeah, that's where we ended up. Other elements came after that then. So once we got to that point where we had the Morse code and the beat, and I kind of knew what the speed was, I started bringing in other elements. So we started bringing in the bass part.
Yeah. Nice.
And then at that point, it's basically the same. It's the same bass line, but then I brought in, I got rid of the super layered synthesizer sound. It went back to something more simple. But it's the same chord progression. So it still keeps the same general vibe.
And then
we brought in
that guitar riff. Yeah. And it also comes in much later than the original. Teasing us there a little, Lex.
Right. So I guess to start, I wanted to kind of play the remixed elements are the key parts and the drum beat,
the drums,
and the Morse code. And so like I wanted to play that and showcase that before we got into what we're calling, I guess, the hook, or like the main riff that is kind of brings both of these mixes together. Yeah. So like, I changed a few elements, but there is still some continuity between both versions.
I'm glad you didn't get rid of it. It's when I listened to it the first time, I was like, this is much slower. I don't recognize it. Where's the little guitar-y part? Oh, there it is. Yeah, so I think the only edit I had to this whole intro music was to put the volume up on the, I guess what we're calling the hook now, right? The riff.
Right.
Because I think, like you said, it really is the thing that connects the first version of the intro music to this remix.
Yeah, and I think that's... I think it was actually a good edit, because when I listened back to it, I'm like, is it? Yeah, you can't really... It's the main sort of thing, so I think that was a good call. So then, I guess, yeah, they teased you a little bit with this other sound, so
yeah.
I'll play that back. I mean, it was something I had put in. That came actually from the original version of the track. There's a whole section that has all sorts of little electric guitar sounding synthesizer riffs that I didn't know what to do with them, honestly, so I cut them from the original. And then I brought that one back for the remix. And I thought maybe the podcast intro plays for like what?
30 seconds usually.
30 seconds.
40,
so
something like that.
To me, it was probably too much. But I don't know. I can work it into maybe the outro version where we play that at the end.
A longer tail at the end. Yeah, that might be a good thing. We'll have a little bit of a longer tail. I like that. Yeah.
But then you keep asking me to make an EP version of this track. So,
I do. I was going to ask.
That
was my next question. Like, what have you thought about? What a full length EP of this track looks like?
Yeah. So I mean, we kind of got the base right. Like, I gave you a 1:30 version. That's probably too long. You won't use the whole thing. But I think I could come up with some sort of arrangement that is a little bit longer that should satisfy your needs.
Thank you. For like 4 or 5 minutes worth?
5 minutes. However long you want, man.
Yeah, 4 or 5 minutes. That's what I'm going to go with.
Okay.
Tell me something that I just thought of right now. How do you feel about open source music?
Open source music.
Yeah, because I mean, we spend our lives building code that's based on open source technology for our clients. We, contribute back into the community with things that are open source. But I don't think we've ever really talked about open source audio and open source sound. What are your feelings on that?
I guess I don't have many thoughts about it. I've never thought about open sourcing the music part. Like, there's things out there that you can open source the creation, the ability to give everyone the tools that they need to make music. But the music itself usually isn't open source. Everything's highly licensed now anyway, right? Like,
right.
Do you think Taylor Swift would ever come out with an open source album?
I don't know. Like, what does that look like? Is it a free download? Is it all of the components of the whole sound?
I mean, I guess that's sort of an idea. Like, when you look at somebody like Chance the Rapper, he released all of his music for free, and then he just did shows and made money doing touring. Or didn't Moby put all of his music online? Not all of his whole library, pretty large chunk of his library online, and allowed people to use it in other creative works. So
that's right. So
I guess it's been done before.
It has been done before, and I suppose the only reason why you might not open source the music is because of the licensing agreements, right? Because you can't then make money off of the streaming by other parties.
Exactly.
You have to go the touring route and the performance route by actually earning dollars from that. Didn't Beck do something like release an album that never had anyone play any of the songs? He released like the music and the notes, and then you could play the album yourself, and it would be however you interpreted the
I
track.
do not know. I'm not sure. I haven't heard of that one. But that sounds
maybe it wasn't Beck.
Sounds like a Beck thing to do. I know he's done other things like. Or a lot of artists too, they'll come out with like sample packs, or producers will come out with sample packs that, you can make money on them sometimes, but other times they're just sort of free, and they're like, this is kind of a set of sounds I used to create a few projects. And that kind of thing happens a lot. I guess there isn't sort of like when you open source code, like people are using GitHub, they're using something that that's kind of like a place where everyone goes, right? Most of the open sourcing is people passing files to each other in forums and that kind of thing.
And changes, the ability to change the sound. I suppose that's what the remix is, right? You've taken your original and you've committed some new changes to the project file.
You'll see that too. Bands will release stem files of songs. Calvin Harris released, I think, 5 acapellas from one of his albums ahead of a big EDM festival, and let everyone just remix it and do whatever they wanted with it. So, I mean, it happens, I guess, but it's not as organized as many of the open source projects are, unless I don't know about them. I guess I never decided or thought to go look for open source music.
Yeah. It just struck me now as something we should talk about. Really interesting stuff. I love talking about the progression of how this all started and hearing all of the different clips that you played for us today. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for creating the music for the podcast. Thank you for remixing it, for changing it, and thank you for spending your time with me today talking about it.
Thanks for having me on. What's the next remix going to be? What do you think?
Well, when I feel a change coming on, I will let you know, and you will be the one that tells me about the remix. I do think, though, that your idea of having a longer tail, a longer version for the outro, I like that. We should, maybe if you're listening to this podcast, we will have implemented it for the end of this particular episode.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Lex is LexFunk, and you can find him on Twitter as @LexFunk. You've been listening to the TEN7 Podcast. Find us online at ten7.com/podcast. And if you have a second, do send us a message. We love hearing from you. Our email address is podcast@ten7.com. Until next time, this is Ivan Stegic. Thank you for listening.